Welcome to the Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. I'm here with Steve Yock from Fallbar Larson's today. Welcome, Steve. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
I've got a bit of a cold, so I apologize for that. And let's just jump right into it. I've met you before because you teach classes as a lawyer for Minnesota Housing First. And I thought, as a lot of the people listening to this show are probably business owners, people in the trades in Minnesota, you have a very unique point of view. The other people that we've brought on are builders and people that own businesses that you advise. So I thought it'd be really interesting to have you on. And before we get started into some of your experiences with these types of entities, tell us a little bit how you became a lawyer and why did you pick construction law?
I went to law school because I was good at college, and I thought law school would be like college with the parties and all that sort of stuff. So I went straight from college to law school, came back home to Minnesota, and I was wholly disappointed. Law school sucked. But from that, I graduated and learned that it's what I was meant to be. But the reason I know that I'm a real estate lawyer, construction lawyer, is because, what we like to call dirt lawyers, is my dad was a builder. So my dad was in construction and was always a real estate developer. And we used to drive around and look at properties and buildings as a kid. We'd always go, that's a good looking building. His was more commercial, but he also built multifamily residential. Yeah. So dirt is in my blood. Yeah. So I started out litigating and doing all kinds of stuff as a young lawyer. But when I got to start making more choices, I naturally moved towards builders, towards litigation, towards selling and buying dirt.
Interesting. Now, growing up, did you have any aspirations to build, or is that something you knew you did not want to do?
Well, it was two rules with my dad. One was that we could never work for him.
Yep.
And second was I was very academic, which I think we kind of know, and being a lawyer really played to my relative strengths. So as soon as I went to law school and I got to learn, I got to read, write, and talk.
Yep.
It's kind of what I'm good at.
Right.
So that's why I did it. I now have some involvement with our family businesses, but not much. Yeah. Because my dad's 81. Yep. But he's sharp. So anyway, I was meant to be a dirt lawyer.
Interesting. I've never heard that phrase before. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
How did just because I think a lot of people that are listening to this show are own their own business, and you offer a unique perspective. Other than calling a lawyer, obviously, to set up their business, what are basically some 101 things that if you were to start a business, it could be any business. It doesn't have to be in the trades or a builder or even a construction or dirt business, if you will. What are some just basic things that people should do to set up a business? Because a lot of times people, they look at an entrepreneur, and for myself, my dad was an entrepreneur, and so my uncles, everyone around me, I just thought that's what you did,
right.
And so for me, anything other than that would be weird.
Right.
But I understand a lot of people look at it like this really difficult thing to do, and I think a lot of it just start doing it, and sometimes leaping without looking has its advantages, but I understand that starting a business, obviously a business plan, coming up with a little bit more a method beforehand is probably advantageous. Anyway, with that question.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, people come in a lot of times with ideas, and most of the time, by the time to get to me, they have a pro forma. Mm-hmm. Right. I've done a lot of startup companies of all different kinds. They have a pro forma. We need to figure out what the entity structure is going to be. And one of the big problems is partners, right? Are you going to have partners or not? And if you are, what's that relationship going to be? You need to have a buy-sell. I mean, it's great when you have a new idea, and you usually have a partner. It's a great idea, and everything's going to be great. We have the greatest idea since sliced bread and canned beer. And yet, what if we don't get along? What if they're the D's? Death, disability, disagreement, departure, right? Any one of those. Jeez. And you need an agreement for that. So if you got a partner, it's better to create an agreement when you're all getting along. And any decent lawyer can help you figure that out.
Yep.
You also need to have an entity. You don't want to operate without an entity in front of you, a C Corp, an S Corp, an LLC, that says to the world, hey, I'm Mark Williams, but I'm not Mark Williams. When you're very disciplined about it, because you're Mark Williams, but construction, comma, Inc. or LLC, right?
Yep.
You got to put the world on notice on that. Otherwise, they're going to come after you personally.
Right.
And then the last thing is, make sure you set up all the accounts and do that other sort of stuff. It's mundane. And one of the things that folks complain about is like, God, that's a lot of paperwork. That's a total pain. I want to start either building widgets or building houses. And my response is always, listen, you're in the business of making money. And one of the reasons you do these things is to protect yourself from personal liability. That's the only reason you're doing it, right? And to protect yourself to some extent from your partner, because you may get along with your partner, but if he gets hit by a bus, you're going to be a partner with his wife unless you have set up some sort of procedure for that.
Interesting. Of the businesses, and this is a total generality, how many partnership businesses are there compared to, sole proprietors?
Well, a lot of people have partners.
Yep.
Now, you can be a partner without filing with the Secretary of State and creating an entity. That's just a general partnership. A partnership model, there's two guys working together, much more common than a solo guy, right? More often than not, it's a group of people. They have an idea. There's a bunch of people running it. It's a function of capital, right? They need to have money that multiple people can put in. So they tend to be together. And it's usually great for a while, but stress and tension or deaths, disabilities, departures, right? That creates tension. And it's better to have those things worked out at the beginning, relatively low cost. And by the way, when it happens and they have an agreement in place, they say, Bob got hit by a bus, right? Well, not hit by a bus. He got hit by cancer, but he died. And what did the remaining guy do? He looked me up. We looked at the agreement and said, okay, you got to buy him out, and here's the terms, and here's how it works. Right? You're not a partner with his wife. This was your business.
So that surprises me. I mean, maybe it's because everyone in my family is all their own owners, and we don't have any. I've always been told as a little kid that partnerships are very difficult.
They are.
But are you saying that a sole proprietor is actually less common than a partnership of some sort?
Well, people tend to more often coming to me. They are not the only sole owner.
Interesting.
I would say you are a minority. Right?
What about my multiple personalities?
Right. Well, there's a lot of you going on, so you're never alone.
Right.
You guys, but for most folks, they come in, they have multiple people. Hey, we want to start this thing.
Okay.
And I would just caution people that, one, you got to figure out the numbers, and you got to make sure your business, for startups, certainly everything costs 3 times as much and takes twice as long. Right. Second is, if you have a partner, you need a clear agreement with them on the Ds. And then finally, you do need to create an entity structure, create a separate bank account, and that business needs to be separate from you, so you're not personally liable if bad stuff happens. And believe me, bad stuff happens.
It's interesting. A little bit of a tangent here. I've brought on a few other builders that are like myself, third generation, and they're much bigger than I am. And one thing I had heard was that in order to work for the family company, they had to work 5 years outside the family company and get either a major promotion or basically demonstrate to the family company. Basically, that was their way, as I understand it, that they would keep creativity going and rejuvenation, so that people, just because your last name was X, didn't mean you're part of the family business. In some ways, I hope my kids don't want to become builders because it's a very difficult business. But we'll play this podcast again in 20 years and see if they want to, and I want to. But I always thought, I was really impressed that there was that kind of foresight. It's really wise to me.
That's a really good idea. I would, as I said earlier, my dad said, you're not going to be in the family business, right? Because he was very much, and intergenerational family businesses are a lot of my clients, so I'm not in any way ripping it, but there is that challenge in nepotism, right? That did the son or daughter really have the skill set to do it, and to send them away, and now I am somewhat involved again in the family business, but I've had a long life doing other things, and I don't have to prove myself anymore. Right. I do think that intergenerational challenge, and interesting, it's the third generations that's the hardest. If you've got dad founded the company, son or daughter comes in, that generation usually does okay. It's that third generation transition that's usually really hard.
Interesting. I'd always heard it was the second, with this idea that like the first one, they had the idea, the inception, they got, maybe the second one had it handed to them, but the third one, if you've made it 3 generations, like clearly something is going right. But so,
that's my experience has been that third generation is often because often they just sell the business. Yeah. Right. There are lots of fights between 2 sons when dad dies, right? That happens all the time. There's a ton of cases in Minnesota. If you want to look up a bunch of family fighting with each other, there's Grossman versus Grossman and Pedro versus Pedro. There's lots of families that have fights. I think you also, from an estate planning perspective, if you have a family business, the worst thing you can do as an own business owner is not have a clear plan that you can tell your children. Yeah. My plan was always with my dad, you're not in the business. Right. You got to go make it on your own. Yep. And for which he gave me much to accomplish that. I wasn't thrown on the street, but I didn't work for him.
A clear plan of succession.
And you need to think about that. Yep. Not it'll work out when I'm dead, because believe me, it often doesn't. Right. And so if you're anyone listening to this is a intergenerational family business, they intend their son or daughter to take over, they need to really clearly define that. Whoever folks you had on, having this outside apprenticeship period is a really great idea.
Yeah, I like that.
It really helps.
How kind of my next question along this line is, what are some common mistakes that you see people they'll come to you? Let's say they call you and they've already had their business. I obviously consulted with another partner of yours before he retired, so we had some ducks in a row. But we, obviously you can need to continually update your contracts, stay relevant, and as your company changes, you need to make sure you're updating. But I guess let's just assume for the sake of this question, a company calls you after 5 years in or 10 years in. What are some common mistakes that you've seen businesses make that you're like, we need to make these changes?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on builders.
Okay.
Right? Because I represent a ton of them, and that's probably who's listening. So first of all, what tends to happen is they come in because they're in a fight with their partner and they didn't have a buy-sell agreement to start with. That is super expensive, right? Yeah. Because if they're not getting along, maybe I can help mediate. Maybe I'll know their lawyer. We can cut a deal. But more often than not, it gets into very expensive shareholder litigation and valuations, that sort of stuff. So that's a big mistake. That thing I said earlier about doing the contracts in the front end, that's a really bad mistake when they call if they're in a fight with their former partners or the spouse of their former partner.
Yeah.
The other common mistake is all the time, which you don't make, but many do. They haven't updated their contract in 5 years.
Yep.
And the Minnesota legislature constantly changes what builders have to do, right? So you got to update the latest statute. You got to update the building standards. It's worthwhile having folks look at that, and very often they don't have that in place. Another really common mistake is their corporate records are bad, non-existent, or they're not maintaining. The way you can become personally liable when you have a company is failure to maintain formalities. That is, you not have your filing with the Secretary of State. You don't treat your entity as different from yourself. You mix the money together. And a lot of times it's about the money. You cannot use that credit card that you have for the company to go buy your groceries at whatever, Hy-Vee. If you're going to do that, then you really got to go back and have an intercompany account that says reimbursement from Sam Smith to Sam Smith Construction, so that your records reflect, and it's a separate set of books. And a lot of people aren't doing that, especially if it's a smaller business. Mm-hmm. Ironically, I've written an article about this. The smaller the business, the more you need the protection. Nobody's going to think that Bill Gates is Microsoft or Microsoft is Bill Gates.
Right.
But if you're Sam Smith Construction, Sam Smith and Sam Smith Construction could be the same thing.
Right.
And they can pierce the corporate veil. So those are probably the three biggest mistakes I see.
Okay. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, about the three different major types of corporations. From business models, builders in the area, and you can use names or not use names, who are some really successful models that you have been impressed with, basically just on how they either structure it or clients that you've had? I know so many builders in the industry. What are some key factors, if you were listening to this, you're like, I want to emulate these principles, and here's some companies?
It is not because you're here. You are exceptionally good at doing the things that people should be doing. So you do everything that I'm going to just talk about.
Okay.
One is creating an entity structure and following it, creating separate accounts, looking at your contracts regularly and updating them, which is sort of an ongoing process that you do and good contractors do. The other is really good contractors. So I will, I prefer not to say by names because they haven't told me to.
Yep.
But one of the things that really sophisticated, smart contractors do is, when you're a builder, all your liability is in your building entity, right? If a homeowner is going to make a claim against you, it's going to be against that operating entity with whom they sign the contract. But let's say you start building some assets, like you have a truck, you have a whole bunch of tools, you start owning other pieces of land. Those should be segregated and separate from your operating entity. And sophisticated construction companies have a rental company that in turn rents the lift, for example, to the construction company. We have a lease because we maintain formalities, right? They're separate. It's just like if you'd hired from somebody else. They have a lease with that. They might have multiple operating entities, in which case they might have an employee lease, and they're actually one other entity owns the employees or has a contract with the employees and then leases it to various operating entities. Just
for those listening, and correct me if I'm wrong, but let's just say you're a corp. We'll talk about this in a minute, I guess. A corp, an S corp, and an LLC. So you would say in this, let's say Mark D. Williams Custom Homes would have a LLC. We'll call it Mark Williams LLC, rental, whatever.
Yep.
And then that company would hold on to my trucks and whatever. And you're saying I'd have a lease back option to Mark D. Williams corporation itself.
Yep.
And why would I want to do that?
That's a really good point. So, you build a house and the wall falls down and crushes a kid, right? worst case thing I can think of.
That's pretty bad.
You'd have insurance, and
Yep.
your insurance may cover it, but I always like to think of a company as walls of defense, right?
Yep.
So at the center is you, your personal liability, and then around it is your company, and then around that is other entities you have. And by maintaining formalities, you help with that. But if they get at your operating entity and they get a judgment against your operating entity, you may be out of business. You may or may, if you don't have the right insurance or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But that only is a judgment against that entity, not you, because you've kept yourself separate.
Mm-hmm.
They get a judgment against your operating entity, but your assets, they can only collect against that entity. If the lift and the truck and your tools and all your other stuff, maybe even some land you own, are in separate LLCs, a judgment against Mark Williams Homes Construction is not a claim against Mark Williams Rental LLC or Property Holdings LLC or those other entities. So it limits how much. In fact, I had to deal with a client. We had like 30 LLCs. And
Wow.
he was developing down in Rochester, and there was a big judgment against his construction company. And these guys went after him for years, trying to get after all his other LLCs. His office manager was a former Arthur Anderson accountant, and he was crazy anal. And I remember the lawyer on the collection side saying to me, we're just never going to be able to collect against your guy. He's created all these entities. It's horrible. And I'm like, it's really horribly wonderful.
Right.
So that guy who got this judgment against him, and it was a huge judgment, continued to be able to operate his businesses. We actually then later created a new entity as an operating entity where his son had the license and not him. He essentially got out of the building business because of this incident. But all his assets were preserved. Right. And so he was able to take those assets, create a new building entity with his son as being the head of it,
Mm-hmm.
and they moved forward and they did just fine.
So I have a tangent question on that. I'd always been told by my accountant, and for those listening, you are my lawyer. I don't know if I'm paying for this legal advice.
You are not paying for this.
But my question, my question on this is, if I had been told that, let's say Mark D. Williams Custom Homes, you need to keep liquid capital, let's say in the main company, right? And let's say, for whatever, let's use real numbers here. Let's say I want to keep $200,000 or $300,000 of operating capital. This would not be my client's money, but our own, profitability or in our reporting, just liquid cash. But anything beyond that, if it was left in the company versus dispersed as like a dividend or allocated towards an LLC, is now subject essentially to, it's attacked. If that company, if during that period, if Mark D. Williams Custom Homes was sued, whatever money was in that bank at that point in time, like a snapshot, that is an asset they could go after.
Yes.
If, let's say, it was dispersed to me for our annual bonuses or however I choose to pay myself, I could keep personally, let's say, excess money with myself personally, and I could always loan it back to the company. Is that a way to essentially shelter some of your cash or some of your assets within an actual company?
Well, there's two different questions there. One is, at the moment a lawsuit is filed, or actually it's when you've been threatened with a lawsuit, if you start shifting your assets
Right.
away from the operating entity, that's a fraudulent conveyance.
Yep.
Okay, so
Yep.
they can unwind all those.
Yep.
The principles that you're talking about is, yes, you could loan money back to the company and then you could pull that money out. The extraordinary transactions in the face of a claim are almost always going to be unwound as a fraudulent conveyance. That's one of the reasons why you don't have any problems.
Yes.
You should pull dividends out to yourself.
Yes.
If you want to leave operating cash in the business and you want you to be the lender, as an insider, they may be more likely to pierce the corporate veil. However, if you took those assets out, gave them a dividend in the ordinary course of business to you, distributed to you, that'd be fine. If you want to loan money to the company, again, you loaning money to the company, a little more problematic. You, however, shifting money out then and buying a lift and a tractor and all that stuff and keeping in your rental LLC or buying land and keeping it in a landholding LLC, as long as you maintain separation, those are just fine.
So interesting. So, yeah, right now we do not have an LLC. And I just bought a couple of trucks and I would like to buy an office. So, I'll probably give you a call tomorrow.
Right. And we will create, and for that
Yeah.
situation, we would create two separate entities. We would create one for the land holdings, for the property for your office. And then we would create another entity where we would put some of your equipment and stuff that you would lend, or you would lease, not lend, lease back to, and it would be at market rates. But it will allow you, first of all, to get some deductibility. And more importantly, it would segregate those assets.
I think a lot of business owners, I mean, I'm certainly not the first person to ask this or do this, but it also seems, just to your earlier comment, like a lot of paperwork.
It's a lot of
but
paperwork.
It does seem like is it akin to armor? Like if you're going into battle versus having just a shield?
You are building defense in depth, right?
Yep.
And you're protecting your assets. The interesting thing is, what's the most important thing about being a good builder? Build well.
Right.
Do
a good job. Like these are all worst case scenario things.
Yeah. And so people go, God, I'm a good builder. I don't need this. I've been doing this for 30 years. I haven't had any trouble. And the reality is you're lucky.
Right.
We're building this for two things. One is because there are crazy people out there who are awful. And even if you do great work, they are still going to be terrible. And in the worst case scenario, they come after you. You're going to want those assets protected. The other worst case scenario is something really bad happens, changes in the business market, or something bad happens and it's not an insured risk, right? You want to protect, you're spending all your life building the work you've done, and builders do. And builders have a particularly tough challenge because of 327A in Minnesota, the statutory warranty statute, really extends warranties up to 12 years after your last construction project. So you're retired.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And they'll want to come after that business, but that business never had the assets, and the assets are elsewhere. You're going to be okay. And that builders, I think, uniquely need to plan more for potential liability than, say, someone who's making chairs.
When I tell people that we are on the hook for, I always, 10, but I believe it's if they file it by the 10th year, they have 2 years, right?
Statute of repose.
Yeah. And so I think people are blown away, especially other business owners.
Right.
Not so much clients, because they're like, okay. And ultimately, knock on wood here, I mean, we've never had any claim ever in our history like that. And so, exactly.
Right.
The staples for Micah, that's, a fake
Close
wood.
enough.
And, but it's alarming that you are warranting something for so long,
right.
And it's very expensive, and obviously you have to have right insurances and all those kinds of things in place, and that's why you have a team.
Most businesses are warranting stuff for up to 6 years. The breach of contract and fraud in Minnesota is 6 years. Uniform Commercial Code is much shorter. So,
which is surprising. A commercial building has less time frame. So like the commercial building we're in right now is governed less than like a house?
Absolutely.
Why?
Protect homeowners. Minnesota has a very unusually aggressive statute to protect homeowners. And, I'm also licensed in Wisconsin. Wisconsin doesn't have it.
How far is Wisconsin?
Right. It's contractual. So they can set it what they want.
You mean the builder?
The builder and the homeowner can set it.
No way.
Now, generally, it's up to unconscionability, right? If it's totally unfair, like I'm not warranting this, you're taking the house as is, they're not going to do that. But yes, they can have very short statute of warranties in Wisconsin.
Interesting. When did, any idea? Oh, I'm guessing you do. When did 27A become a law in Minnesota?
Well, it's been a law. I've been practicing for 33 years, and I would say for most of that time, it's been there.
Wow.
So yeah, and so I think it's a huge boon for Minnesota homeowners.
Yes.
But it's very hard on our builders.
Yeah.
Because it's that long continuous. No, it's the 1-2-10, 1 year bumper to bumper, the way I like to think of it. 2 years HVAC, plumbing, and electrical, and then 10 is structural.
Correct.
So it's not bumper to bumper for 10 years.
Understood.
But I also would say that people do really strictly enforce it. The courts tend to be very generous to homeowners about their ability to enforce it on statute of limitations and other grounds. And we have a legislature that is very pro homeowner as against builders. Housing First works very hard to try to level the playing field and see that everyone's treated fairly.
Yep.
And so they are the advocates and the best advocates I think we have in Minnesota for builders.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's amazing. I have a question for you that's kind of akin to this question. We develop, let's say some of our builds are maybe 6 months to a year in design, maybe a year to 2 years of actually building. And one thing that I wouldn't say we've struggled with, but you've basically been on call. You've been the server at a great restaurant for this entire experience. Right. They've now paid the bill and they have left the building. But our clients still text us, call us all the time. Now, I don't want to be, that's part of customer service, and I'm not going anywhere, nor do I want to. But what have you seen as far as successful clients or successful builders transition from telling their clients, like, hey, the build is over, we're no longer a 24/7 service, but still maintaining a level of respect? Like, they just built a $2 to $5 million house with you, and for practical reasons, like, I'm going to be there generationally. Like, I not only want their future business but it's not selfishly, like, I really enjoy these people, but it's, I can't be getting texts from 100 clients do you understand the question?
I know exactly what the problem is. So first of all, for a year, you're on the hook. anyway, right?
Yes.
Largely. I mean, there's some points where you argue it's not punch list or not, but
Yes.
From substantial completion or occupancy, you got a year. You could say, I'm sorry, that's no longer covered under Minnesota statute of warranty, and I won't do it. In fact, there's a case called the Vallejo case. And in Minnesota, there's a thing called equitable tolling. So if they call you up and say, I got this problem, will you fix it? It's in the first year. Or maybe it's HVAC plumbing, it's in the second year. And you go, sure, I'll get to it, but you don't. And they call you up and say, hey, I still got this problem, will you fix it? Yeah, I'm going to send some over. And you delay beyond the statute of limitations, right? They have to bring it, by the way, when they know of a claim, they have to bring it within 2 years. They have to provide you written notice within 6 months, and they have to commence it within 2 years.
And they also have to come to us first. Like they couldn't go have it fixed and then expect us to pay it, right? We always have the right to fix our own work.
Opportunity to repair statute.
Yep.
However, they need to tell you in writing. So one of the things too is, one of the interesting things that you could say is, well, when did this first arise? And it was, people want to say, it's been going on for a year or years, and only now I'm getting back to you. Well, actually, that bars their claim, right? If they were aware of it for more than 6 months and did not give you written notice of the claim, they're barred.
Do I have to get that in writing? Because what if that's a verbal thing? Do I respond back with an email? Per the conversation we had today, you had mentioned it had been years.
Yeah, I usually, one of the things yes, you should get it in writing because they'll deny it. Also, I mean, in Minnesota, it is legal to record conversations for at least one party.
Yeah.
So you can't like bug a room, but you could have a recording on. And if you recorded the conversation with them, they said, hey, yeah, we've been aware of this for a year and we're only getting back to you now because we tried to be patient. Well, that would bar their claim, right? I mean, I've been in those situations. But with back to equitable tolling, if you keep promising you're going to fix it and you never do, you can't say, too late, statute of limitations is run. Your action saying, I'll get to it, but you don't, tolls or extends the statute of limitations. So this is really hard, to your point. What should builders do if they don't want to do it anymore? They got to go like this, right? They got to send them a letter or send them an email saying, I'm sorry, I will not fix that. That is not covered by the statute of limitations, which I know then, and excuse the legal term, but then the asshole flag just went up. They're going to be mad at you. You said no.
Yeah.
But what Vallejo says is, unless you actually put a stake in the ground and say no, you arguably, if you say, I'll take care of it, even if it's not covered, they're going to hold you to it.
And that tends to be, I also think it's also a hallmark of what has made us successful as well. It's a fine line between it being a good person, running a good business, setting clear expectations. And sometimes, as you know, because I've called you, I've had clients essentially use my personality against me. And I guess I'm okay with that at the end of the day if I have 1 out of 100, because really our clients are amazing. And this is really just trying to talk to other business owners because I'm not the only builder that struggles with this.
But it depends too on your business model.
Yep.
So you build a relatively small number of extremely high-end homes. That makes you more service-oriented. There are also we'll call more economical builders that are doing more volume and are not as attuned to people that are building multi-billion-dollar houses. Getting calls from their clients after the statutory period, they have to be able to say no.
Right, especially if you had 40 of them.
Right.
If I have 4 and they have 40, now you need to hold the department to service
Someone's
that.
got to say no. The big builders and the ones I work with, they're big builders, work very hard to try to accommodate their clients too. But there comes a point where you have to say, look, lady, I'm sorry. We're not doing nail pops after 2 years, right? You can go fix them yourself, or whatever. You have an electrical problem 3 years later, 5 years later. And I've had situations where like they claimed it was a defective chimney, and it was 14 years after they had built the house.
Oh my!
So we said no to that.
Yeah, you had mentioned on that 10 years. So before, email and cell phones in my dad's career, they would have those lawyer boxes with all their documents.
Yep.
I remember very clearly, because my dad was a total pyro, that on year 10, I'm sure the lawyers did not like this. You know where this is going. He would go, he would go out in our backyard in 3 acres. He'd stack them up.
Right, the
put gasoline
pyre.
on them,
there you go.
and he just would smile ear to ear. And then people would ask him a couple years later what paint color was in that house, and he goes, "I have no idea."
Right.
And he was retired at this point.
No, you're not,
anyway,
and you're not required to keep it. I would keep it through the statute of repose.
Yeah,
I'd keep it for 12 years, which is ridiculous. You're keeping all this stuff, and then I think you can get rid of it. And I actually tell guys that retire, men and women that retire in their businesses, you should keep that entity in place for the 12 years.
Interesting.
That's what again, another thing for builders. That's another expense. But But by keeping that entity in place, it creates another layer of protection.
Interesting. So do you have to do some sort of minimal insurance then on that too? Just like
it depends on the nature of your insurance. So there's two types of insurance policies: claims made and occurrence. If it's occurrence, you won't need it because the actual negligent act occurred while the policy existed. If you had a claims made, you will need to keep what's called tail coverage for the end.
Interesting. Well, let's transition a little bit. We've talked about it a lot. I think most people listening may know this, but just go over basically the different types of companies. So I'm sure there's more, but you have a corporation, an S corp, and an LLC. Just give us a real high overview of what those three are and how they play together.
Sure. The most basic corporation, which in America goes all the way back to the Jamestown colony, was the first corporation in the United States, which is a C corp. That's the traditional corporation that you see for most large companies. It is subject, by the way, to double taxation. That is, both the company itself gets taxed at a corporate level, and then the owners get taxed on their income. So most builders, smaller builders, are not C corps. Okay, they're usually you can make what's called an S corp election, and S corps then can be treated as a single person entity or partnership for tax purposes. You avoid double taxation. There's a lot of limits on being an S corp. So, for example, in a corporation or in an LLC, the distribution rights need not match ownership rights. So you own 30% of the business, but you get 60% of the distributions. But in an S corp, it has to match. If you have 70% of the votes and your partner has 30, you get 70% of the distributions and he gets 30. That's it.
Interesting.
So
partnerships are maybe a little bit more difficult to structure in an S corp.
Well, unless you've defined it.
Yes.
Right. And again, that's if you have a written agreement, it's fine. So we've done C corps, you have S corps. S corps are very common also when you're running a company and you have employees and have a decent amount of complexity. An S corp is an easier company generally to operate than if you have a bunch of employees on an LLC. Then you have some self-employment taxes and some more complicated issues if you're an LLC. There are other entities too. In Minnesota, there's limited partnerships, and they're limited liability, limited partnerships. There's a bunch of other entities. They're more specialized and are often used to create funding. So you want to create a limited partnership that says you're going to have a bunch of limiteds come in, which would for a contractor wouldn't be unusual. You're going to be the general partner in the development of this apartment building. You're going to be the one who has the unlimited liability as the general, as the name implies. They have limited liability. They're a little bit more silent investors.
So interesting. So like I'm looking at a land deal right now, let's say 6 acres. I don't know the price. Let's call it $2 million. And they're approaching us saying, hey, we'd like you to build. In that case, I would keep Mark D. Williams Custom Homes or maybe create up a side LLC, but then I would have a limited liability company with these investors to just take down the land development, but to keep it separate from the building.
Absolutely.
Okay, interesting.
The whoever owns the land should be separate from the building entity. There's no way your construction company should do it. So LLCs are extremely flexible. Again, who owns them, what voting rights they have, what distribution rights they have, that can all be, and Minnesota recently adopted the statute. It is kind of a partnership model. So if you're in an LLC, you're in a partnership really with the other owners, but it's very flexible. And you want to be smart. You want to lay out, I have more voting rights, you have more distribution rights. It could be equal, it could be proportional, but LLCs are very flexible. And in Minnesota, they're comparatively cheap. I have a client that does a lot of work in California. Creating entities in California are like 5 times as expensive here. So you spend a few $100s to create that LLC, and then you pay a relatively nominal filing fee every year. It's completely worth it. And I have clients I have one client that has probably 40, 50 LLCs, and we're constantly moving land in and out of those LLCs. We have a big chart. Wow. And so he's like, I just sold this property and I just bought this one, right?
Right.
And the reason we're doing that is to protect liability from flowing between those entities, right? Someone gets a judgment against, XYZ Land Holdings 12. Our liability is limited to 12. They can't go after 13 or 11.
Yep.
So beyond the big three, corporate, corps, S corps, and LLCs, there are other specialty entities that usually relate to financing or estate planning.
Interesting. I think that's good for now anyway. Consult Stephen for more information on that one.
If it wasn't complicated, I wouldn't have a job. So, it's all good.
That's funny. So, excuse me, transitioning, you represent Minnesota Housing First.
I do.
Tell me a little bit about how that relationship came and, I assume it even with Fallhaber or Larson, you teach classes. I don't know, give us a little education, because that's how I met you. I took some classes from you, through our education, our continuing education. Met you at the big night. Oddly enough, I was dealing with a crazed homeowner, one of your classes, and so that led to some side conversations. But tell us a little bit about Minnesota Housing First.
Housing First was previously Batsy. My now retired wonderful partner, Tim Hassett, really got to know the folks there way at the beginning. And he was there many years. I have taught, for at least 25, 22 years there, a lot of different classes and all kinds of different stuff. And as is the nature of life, the leadership changed and Tim retired. I stepped in as they stepped back. The new leader, James Vagley, who just came in, is really exciting and is a really dynamic guy. And I've been working with James and his team. So I do their sort of general corporate stuff and their business stuff. And I've gotten to know them all very well. Also, one of the things people may not know is Housing First is tremendously generous with the public. There's a Housing First Foundation where Housing First helps coordinate, fund, and invest in new homes for homeless veterans in conjunction with MACV, the Minnesota Association of Veterans.
We've been lucky to partner with them, so a lot of times our homes will be elected to be the dream home. And during the Parade of Homes in the spring and the fall in Minnesota, as there'll be a home tour, and they'll pick 4 homes. Usually the highest end homes are the most in the right location, which we happen to often operate in. And so then all the entry fees will go towards that foundation.
That's great.
And so then Donnie, who used to run it, and a number of other people will come through and help support it. But it's a great message. It's a great thing. I used to have sometimes people come up not knowing anything about the foundation, and it says right on the sign for the foundation, but they'll be like, "Why am I giving this builder $5?" And I'm like, "Hey, it's not a GoFundMe page for Mark Daly Williams Custom Homes. Here's the link to that page."
Right. It is, and we've put in a whole number of homes now in conjunction with MACV and Lennar. By the way, I should mention it's a 3-way agreement between Minnesota Housing First Foundation, Lennar, and MACV, and they've done tremendous good. So I do a lot of work. I volunteer all my time on that, and then I do a lot of the general corporate business work for MACV or for Housing First, and then also I teach, and I really enjoy teaching. It's been really interesting. I used to, of course, teach in person. Everybody would go to the class, and you'd be standing there, and there'd be initially there'd be 100 guys and women paying attention. Then cell phones came out. Then you'd have and computers. So now you got 100 people not paying attention. What's interesting now is I'm increasingly doing classes online. So I go over to Housing First. They have a great studio facility, and I have recorded a number of classes, including that crazed homeowner class that people seem to really like. And so it's weird now because the classes are all floating out there in the ether. And I've taught probably maybe 3 or 4, and I've got a new one I'm going to teach in the spring, but it'll be virtual again.
How do you, now being as an educator or teacher in this format, you've taught to classes where they pay attention, classes where they don't pay attention. And then you have obviously a digital format. One of the reasons why I chose a podcast, especially for the first year, it was important to me that all of them be in person because it's just more enjoyable to talk to someone, the nuances of, body language and things like that. What's it like teaching to a camera?
It's really hard. So first of all, there's a camera in front of you, and it's a totally dark room. So the room's basically black with a bright light on me.
Oh my.
And so, and as you know, I like to joke, right? So, and I've taught that particular class many times, and there's a couple of funny parts of the thing. And I have to just hope that they're laughing. Right. When I'm telling the joke, because I'm not getting a laugh, right? So and when I love teaching in person, and so I like joking with, in fact, it's kind of funny, over the years, the criticisms I've got that I've gotten was, one, you joke around a lot. This is very serious. I'm like, well, actually, I take what we do incredibly seriously. I don't take myself that seriously. Right. So, and there's a big difference in life.
I like that quote.
And so, and by the way, Housing First is like, we don't care. Just keep doing what you're doing. And because I like it when people laugh. And oh, by the way, the questions when they're in person are fabulous.
Yes.
And I love answering questions. As you can tell, I love just talking. And that's not the case when you're virtual, right? Sometimes I've got people, and I encourage people to do it in the class. They have followed up with me in emailed questions, and I answer them, and that's fine. I like talking to people, but it's harder.
Yeah, I imagine.
I know it's way more convenient for builders, right? They can grab their phone and be sitting on a beach and taking my class. Right. Good for them. That's a better part of the world. But for me, it's not as much fun.
I agree. I think I enjoy the interaction as someone who loves to communicate. And I think also you're playing off the person. Like, I think if, even with this being in person ourselves, like a lot of times the questions, the way the conversation goes, I mean, it just changes it.
It's the new world.
Yes.
And to Housing First's credit, they adopted it early.
Yep.
They created the facilities. They did the things you needed to do.
And I would say as a user, I like it a lot. It's not like, even I'm on a few committees with Housing First, right? I'm on the Artisan Home Committee and the Parade of Homes Committee, and not have to drive, half hour, 40 minutes each way for these hour meetings. While I'm happy to do it, and I still think it's probably better. Man, because it's volunteer time essentially.
Right.
It's more. I think while Zoom obviously can get old after a while, it's extremely productive in terms of time, especially that transit time.
Oh, agreed. No, and COVID changed everything, and it definitely changed this a little bit for us too.
Yeah, interesting. Well, let's talk about some of those classes. So we already talked about legally running a business. I think we've covered that in depth. And I love stories. I think another reason why laughing, I think, is important both in teaching as well as somber moments is people remember when there's emotion. Yeah. At least it does for me. I was a speech comm major, and one of the classes one of the stories I told was about, I had a Down syndrome uncle. And whenever I told the story, I got really emotional. And at baseline, I'm not an emotional person in the terms of being like sad, but I could make people in the crowd cry. And it's interesting how emotion and, levity, soberness, all of these things are emotion. We're human. Like, we feel emotion, right? And I think when you tap into that, people remember things, right? Like your ears prick up when there's one of those things that happen. Tell us a little bit about this, responding to a homeowner's threats. I call it the crazed homeowner speech, but, there's a lot of do's and don'ts, but maybe just stay high level on this, and then maybe a story or two, because I think this is really applicable. I mean, it's a little bit like therapy. I've never really been on a lot of these builder trips because my wife is pretty introverted, and the last thing she wants to do is go on a vacation with, 30 other builders. Right. But myself personally, I would love it.
Yeah, I know you would.
I would love it, but I would be going solo. My wife will not come with me. Yeah. But anyway, the idea is, like, a lot of it is I find so much value in shared experience. I mean, one of the main reasons why I started the podcast was to talk to other builders. Yeah. And, and this is a way that, how often do you get 1 hour, where you are just going back and forth, and it's really, really enjoyable. I don't know if anyone else is enjoying your seat, but I enjoy being with you.
First of all, I love to talk.
You do.
That's so we'll talk about crazed homeowners. So first of all, how that class developed was I have had many, 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 many clients who have dealt with crazed homeowners. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, and there's two themes to that speech. One is you got to have your documentation. We create documentation, the entity separation, all the things we talked about, not for the good client, not for the majority clients. If you're lucky, you'll get one of these every 10 years, right? But the reality is these people are out there. You can do the finest quality work, but they're just horrible people. Mm-hmm. So if your paperwork is in order, that protects you and also protects you if there's a dispute. Mm-hmm. So one big thing is do your paperwork. It's a pain in the butt. We've talked a lot about this already, but those best practices are what save you. Because what happens is the first thing they always say when I get called when somebody is a crazy homeowner is, well, let me see your contract and have you exchanged emails? Let me see all your change orders. Well, we've been helping them a lot and we didn't do change orders. I'm like, well, first of all, that's illegal. Under Minnesota law, as a builder, you need a written change order. And second of all, what you just did for free, you did for free. You're screwed. You're not going to get that money back. Yep. Right? Where if you said it's a change order and I'll do this and you'll concede that, you've got to get it in writing. The second thing is you've got to be a professional, right? You're held to a different standard. They're allowed to be crazy. The statutes kind of contemplates their craziness. And one of the stories that I tell that I know is the best example in my speech was, I had this wonderful client, this big guy who's now passed away, and he was a mountain of a man. And he always wore work boots and nice jeans, and his fingers were humongous. But he was a really, really good-looking guy. I looked like a troll next to him. And clients loved him. And he was a hunter and the whole deal. So a very physically intimidating guy, but wasn't intimidating. Everybody just loved him. Right. My wife was like, he's just like a big bear. But he goes over to these people's house and he gets out of his truck. And we have all this on video, which is pretty wonderful. And I'll explain why. He gets out of his truck and the wife of the guy is in the bay window in the front of the house. She's got the curtain open. She's filming as my client arrives. which, by the way, is legal because her husband had given consent to be filming. This is back to that recording issue. And she's even got the mic so you can hear because the window's ajar. And my guy gets out and he says, hey, how you doing? We should talk about this because he's gotten a nasty call. This is a call from the guy. And the guy goes into his garage and starts screaming at him and comes out with a hoe, like the loopy hoe with a little triangle on it, that kind of hoe, and starts like screaming and profanities and swearing at my guy, and he's shaking it. Now, my guy could have taken 3 steps, tore it out of his hands, broke it over his leg, and thrown the guy through the front window.
Right.
Instead, my guy puts his hands up, says, hey, look, you got to put that down. You got to stop swearing. Got to calm down. The guy continues and shaking. My guy goes, we'll talk when you've calmed down. He gets in his car and he left. Mm-hmm. And it's all on video. And you say, how do I know that's on video? My guy clearly wasn't filming it. Well, they later made a claim at the Department of Labor and Industry against my client. And
they submitted that video?
And they submitted the video because they thought somehow it showed how uncooperative my client was. So it's the quintessential example of builders are held to a higher standard of behavior. Mm-hmm. How you succeed with
to be clear too, all business owners essentially, not only builders as well.
I think builders are held to a higher standard.
Interesting. Okay.
I think when dealing with a homeowner, everybody in business is held to, let's say, if you're 2 business people, you're held to a higher standard
than
of
the
behavior
client,
than a consumer.
Understood.
Right? Probably somebody at Best Buy is going to be held higher than the person that walks in the door. Yeah. But for builders in particular, I believe we as builders and people who've been with builders for so long, you're going to be held to a higher standard of behavior. They're supposed to be emotional because it's their house. What is the visceral thing is their hearth and home. Right. And so builders have to really not respond. And I think one of the classic responses is, you're sitting, it's always Friday afternoons, right? They get out of work, they see something, they're pissed. They've had a couple of drinks, right? And they text you a horrible text, right? And you're, by the way, maybe it's 7:00 on a Friday and you're entitled to have a cocktail or 2 and you're sitting there with your wife in a bar and the thing goes ding and you look at it and they've just called you terrible things. You have a natural tendency, you want to take that text right back, back at you and the horse you rode in on, right? What you have to do is go, no, I'm going to put that aside, right? I've had a drink or 2 or I'm going to deal with this first thing tomorrow morning, right? Because if you write back in that text and say what you're really thinking, it will haunt you.
Right.
And by the way, the only really nice thing too is an added benefit. If they write crazy mean letters or texts and you write very professional,
it drives them batty.
It drives them nuts.
So I'll say this, and not really to toot my own horn, but just something for those listening that has really helped me personally. I have 3 young kids, as you know. Family time is extremely important. I tell my clients that, essentially at 5:00, like the dentist or, your appointment, it's off. Now, if there's an emergency or something, water's coming in, of course, I'll always answer. But I really stress that that's important to work-life balance. And most of my clients really respect that, actually, especially when you explain the reasons why. But the reason I bring it up is you mentioned the texting. About 2 years ago, I think it was The Social Network was a documentary on just, how much digital stuff affects our lives. And I took it I turned off all my texting, email, any notification other than my phone. So I always tell people, because I'm a verbal person, call me, I will answer. I will return the phone call. But for me, texting is, I'll be there, I'm 5 minutes late. Can you pick up something here? I can't tell you how many texts that are just, well, I can, because I've sent them to you, just page-long texts. It's so ridiculous. I'll often say, thank you for your text. In the future, please respond by email. I'll respond tomorrow with an email to try to get it back into a business setting.
Right.
I want them to feel heard. A lot of times, this almost never happens, right? In the 18 and a half years I've been building, I've had 2 difficult clients, if you will, where I've had to learn a lot of this. And, they've been in the last year, unfortunately. Every builder told me I'm way overdue.
You are overdue.
And so I look forward to the next 18 years of peace and quiet. And anyway, but the point of it is I do feel like setting up some boundaries. And I think that's the reason I bring it up again is it helps me not to react. And now you've complimented me before on this, my natural, when people get hot, I get cool.
Right.
Sometimes that actually makes them much madder.
Which is okay.
Because
you're creating a good record.
Right, you try. So anyway, for anyone listening out there, set some parameters for yourself. You're good at what you do. Take pride in what you do, and it's so easy. We get defensive of what we do, right? And so you take a lot of ownership in it. So when people attack you for doing a really hard work, it's difficult to take.
Yeah, and never respond with an irritated response. It just, it never reads well. It never, even if you are, and by the way, I can guarantee you they're 100% out of line. They're 100% in the wrong. That what they've written is personally offensive. What you need to do is stop and think of like you were behaving with your ill behaving teenager. Right. It doesn't do any good to scream at them. It's good to set boundaries. Right. And to be polite and professional, because what happens someday is either a judge or a jury or the Department of Land Industry is going to read what you wrote. You don't ever want to regret it. You want to be able to say, I hear you. I respectfully disagree with you. Here's why. Here's what our plan is going forward. Please let me know if you agree. And I agree. Email's the better venue to be doing it.
Right. How, transitioning a little bit, the relationship between, let's say, aside from the homeowners, if you have a discrepancy with one of your subcontractors. So recently, again, never has happened in my career until recently, I had 2 contractors that, the work that they did was subpar. Most of the strength of what we do is relationship based, right? So I've used most of my people for multiple decades, and I have that privilege of they're a family run business. I was a family run business. And so you have these you can't build the homes that we build unless you have a relationship and a trust both ways. So usually not only do you have 5 other homes going on where I can say, hey, Mr. Cabinet Maker, Mr. Tile Guy, I need your help here. I don't really even need to say I'm using you on 5 other projects, but, every once in a while you get a specialty project. And this particular person I'm talking about was a specialty project. I did not have a relationship with them, and their work did not hold up, and they would not honor it. So it became a really difficult situation for me because they happened to also be with one of the homeowners that was very difficult as well. And so I ended up stepping up to the plate, taking care of the work, and I had to do a judgment against the person. I'm not really a lawsuit person. It just, that wasn't really what I was trying to go for, but sometimes you have no choice. I was out of pocket. Walk the listeners through a little bit. How does a judgment work against maybe another trade partner? I think there's some caps on that, so they don't have to go, let's say, full legal. Walk us through a little bit how that works.
Well, first of all, it starts with the agreement you have with the sub. So you need to have, it's hard because they send you a PO or you send them they send you an invoice, you send them a PO, you want something done, you want it done quickly, you fax or scan or whatever the specs. What you ideally want is some sort of overarching agreement. So what I like is to have an annual subcontract agreement that automatically renews. And then you can just send your normal stuff, but if there's terms and conditions in that annual contract, it defines, for example, do you want an attorney fees provision? If I get in a fight with you, I want you to pay my attorney's fees. If I lose, I'm only going to sue you if you're wrong.
Right.
So I have an attorney's fees provision. Do you have like a venue provision that says it just has to occur in whatever county is convenient for you, Hennepin County, right? You don't want to have to fight them if they're from Rochester down in Olmsted. So it's good to have an overarching agreement that says this will handle all agreements there are between the two of us. I don't need to sign a full contract on every deal. We'll do it however we do it, but these terms and conditions will apply. That's the most important thing. The second, because and even if you've had a long-term relationship, I agree that most things are about relationships. But I have a client recently that it was a concrete-related kind of business, and the son took over, and he was a dink. Right? And the dad was great. Right? And then my client was like, wow, what do I do in that situation? And I said, well, you need to get a new contract because you can't trust the son. He's a wanker. Let's go get him, treat him arm's length, and maybe things will get better in a few years, and maybe you got to find a new contractor. But I think having that main contract in place. Now, if they breach it, it's like all other things. I believe in a graduated response. If the subs aren't doing the work, first of all, as the general contractor, as you demonstrated, you are ultimately responsible for the condition of the home. If they do a bad job, you have a claim against the sub. But the homeowner doesn't care. You got to fix it.
And that was the deal. I think it cost me $15,000 or $20,000. It has been a year and a half since I fixed it, and you just helped me basically garnish wages, which I didn't even know what that was a thing. In order to get a judgment, I think you can only go up to what, $15,000?
Well,
in Minnesota.
There's a limit in conciliation court.
So,
and that's because it was a smaller amount. You were able to get a judgment. So without going into the details of your matter, if it's below, I believe the threshold is $15,000, but it could be $20,000. I don't remember for smaller claims court. You got a small claims judgment based on their defective work and based on the contract you had. You got a judgment. Now, what my old boss used to say, there's 3 parts to every lawsuit: liability, damages, and collection. Right? Because did he do bad work? Yes. How much were you damaged? Well, you know that. then you got to collect.
That was the part that was never explained to me. That is really hard.
So in Minnesota, you get a judgment. So you demonstrated they were liable, and you demonstrated your damages. Now the court issues a judgment order. It has to be docketed in the courts, which takes a long time. And then you got a judgment. Well, what do you do with it? Well, you can garnish their bank accounts if you know where they are. You can garnish, if it's an individual, you can potentially garnish their wages. If they have any real property, you can file a lien against it. It's not easy. By the way, and in Minnesota, it's 100 times easier than Wisconsin. Wisconsin makes collection very difficult. In Minnesota, it's comparatively easier. So here's an advantage in Minnesota. But it's a pain, and it takes a long time to collect.
Yep.
Right? And it requires some discipline and some willingness, depending on the language of your contract. You may not be able to collect attorney's fees associated with trying to collect. So you're spending good money after bad.
I have a funny story for you on this that is only coming to me now. So as I mentioned before, my dad built homes for 30 years. We build 4 homes a year. He built 40, different price range, but he had a judgment. Now that I think about it, I was in high school and he couldn't collect money on it. And it was someone who was a good client, but he just owed him money. And it wasn't much. I think it was like $8,000, and it was to be paid over like 5 years. Just pay me $100 a month or whatever, just something small. He said, I can't get it. So he laid out the terms for me. I remember very clearly, I was a teenager. He said, this is what I would advise you to do. Whatever you can collect, you get 50% of. $8,000 to a 16-year-old. That sounds amazing. And he goes, I would call him every Monday and every Friday. Just as a reminder saying, hey, I'm David Williams' son, and this is Mark Williams. I'm calling to remind you that you owe David A. Williams Construction, $100, and your payment is due this month. They never returned my phone calls, ever.
But they write the checks?
I think I got a couple out of them. I think it took a while. I think I'd have to go back and look. I know I got some money, but I think the whole point of it was, because I remember Dad with this big wolfish grin, he got his point across. He wanted to demonstrate to me how difficult it was. That was just something I often comment about, because I went to college, but I sometimes think, like, what did I actually learn in college? I think I learned a lot of things outside of college. I mean, even when we were, when we were younger, like really young, like you're going to love this. When we were like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, like the age my kids are now, my dad would have us pick up the office phone and answer like we were the receptionist. Or my dad would want to get the concrete guy on the phone. He would hand me the phone. He said, please call the concrete guy. So I would call, and I'm like, what am I supposed to say? He goes, I don't know, just get him on the phone. And he said it was always, I never thought about this if he had a master plan. I think he just liked delegating. And so here's my 6-year-old sister, Ashley, and she would call up and she'd be like,
please hold for Mr. Williams.
And I remember she hated it, and I kind of liked it. But anyway,
my dad had us picking up trash on construction
we
sites.
did that. We did that too.
I did not answer the phones, but we did a lot of sweeping and a lot of trash picking up.
Anyway, well, we could talk forever. We don't have a ton of time left. I did want to. One of the things that is so interesting about you, I call you a Renaissance man, because you're involved with everything. And while most of the people I'm having on as business owners, but you obviously have created a number more businesses than anyone on here will have. You're an author. And you have 2 books out. One is called Becoming George Washington. That's been published. And you're working on another called Becoming Benedict Arnold. I'd just be curious, how in the world did you get into wanting to write a book? And is writing a book a little bit like starting a company?
Yes. To answer the second question is yes. Mm-hmm. The first one is, as I said, I'm a super nerd, right? So I like reading, I like writing, I like researching. And that's what I've been doing for, 3 decades. And sometime in 2014, I've always read a lot of biography. I always loved George Washington. The more I read about George Washington, the more I liked and admired him. By the way, the more I read about Thomas Jefferson, the less I do. But in particular, I became sort of fascinated on how does he become our indispensable founding father? Without George Washington, the revolution would have failed. And that led me to his childhood. And I found this story that no one knew, right? I mean, even nerds didn't know it. And it's George's story from 14 to 28. It's the least known part of his life. George caused the French and Indian War. I don't mean like he played a role in it. I mean, it was his fault. And by the time he's in his mid-20s, he is the colonel running the entire Virginia military. In his early 20s, he's a colonel. And by the time the war ends, he's the second most famous man in America and is second only to Benjamin Franklin, and has married Martha Custis, the wealthiest woman in Virginia. And also, I believe, and he was crazy brave. My original title, instead of Becoming George Washington, was George Washington Action Hero. He had horses shut out from under him. He was just insane. And I also believe he had an affair with a woman named Sally Fairfax. And I want to be clear, this was before Martha. George was not married. Sally was in a loveless marriage. And it's a great story. And so I just started writing it, which I really had no idea how much I would enjoy it.
Yeah.
And it was an incredible experience. And then that led me, and that was so much fun, and the book was well received, that led me to start writing about Benedict Arnold, who is our greatest trader. And I wrote it from his perspective. And it's with my publisher right now. It should be out in the spring.
Amazing. How does one write a book? I mean, so you did the research. Yeah. I mean, did you plot out like a, I'm a big nerd. I listen to a lot of sci-fi and fantasy novels, and I often think about all these great ideas. How, and yours is more of a historical fiction, obviously, or history. But how does one go about blocking out, or what was your journey to blocking out an actual book? Or did you just literally just start writing and it just kind of formed?
Well, first of all, for anybody out there that wants to write a book, how you should start writing a book is start writing it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's so many people I talk to like, I'm going to write a book. I'm like, well, just start. Yeah. That's how it works. You just write and things happen or they don't. For me, I'm constrained by the historical reality. So I have an outline of the period of his life that I'm writing.
I gotcha.
So that outline for me becomes more and more dense. When George, and I write footnotes as I'm dictating it so I know where the sources come from. So I'll read a book and I'll keep inserting what I learned from that book, and then I read another book and I keep inserting it, and there's footnotes below. And eventually sections of the book become so dense, there's so much detail about that particular event, that there's this transcendental moment for me. It's when it converts into dialogue. So I'll never forget the very first one. I often don't sleep well at night. So I wake up in the middle of the night and George Washington gets elected to the House of Burgesses, and he's sitting in a tent when he found out. We know all this. Waiting, and the results arrive late at night. It's hot. They had a lot of problems with mosquitoes. So he's sitting in this canvas tent, and he has basically two choices. You sit and sweat in the tent in a hot night, boiling life, or you open the tent and get eaten by mosquitoes. Well, we're all from Minnesota.
Right, yeah, boundary waters.
we understand what the solution is, right? You sweat. You just rather sweat than be fighting off mosquitoes. And his guys come in and tell him he's won, and that entire scene just came into my head. Dialogue, there's a couple of jokes. The entire thing came into my head at once in the middle of the night, and I dictated the dialogue. And that's why I'll write until the rest of my life, because these transcendent moments when the dialogue comes in your head and you know what George was thinking or what Benedict was thinking or what others were saying is why I love doing it so much and why I'm going to keep doing it until I die. My third book is becoming Benjamin Franklin, and that's going to actually be 2 volumes. So I'm already starting to do the research on that.
Wow. These are obviously very famous individuals. How does one go about writing a book or having the confidence to write a book thinking like, oh man, there's been so much written about this guy. What am I going to add to the world? But you just mentioned, hey, this period of this person's life, nobody knew anything about. Yeah. A, how do you overcome the first part of like, this is a very well-researched topic already? And then 2, where do you go to find this information?
So first of all, George is there's books that come out every year on George. There are scholars that have their life dedicated to him.
Wow.
Every letter that we have that George sent and received has been organized by the University of Virginia in what's called the George Washington Papers. They're fully annotated. So I've read every letter that George ever sent or received during the relevant periods of my books. It's about 8 volumes. There are similar things for Benjamin Franklin. There's for Thomas Jefferson. There is not for Benedict Arnold. Right? There is one book that has some letters. So I do a lot of research. I love researching. I love reading the books. I don't know how many books I read for George. I read more for Benedict. And you just do the research. Yeah. For George, it's important, if you look at the front of my book, for those who get it, it says a novel. My book is very unnovel-like. At its peak, it had 1,400 footnotes, and there are about 30 pages in the back of the book with detailed authors' discussions with citations about, what I hate about historical fiction, which this is at the end they say, well, I made this person up, I made this up, and nothing's made up in my book as far as I know, but there are periods where it's more controversial, and here's what some of the nonfiction authors say, and here's what others say. And I think it's important when you write historical fiction to know where that line is, right? My book, George, is about 95% what happened. 5% I'm rating primarily to Sally Fairfax. We don't know, and we'll just never know.
Right.
But I get to choose, so I have him having the affair.
Right.
And Benedict Arnold's the same way, right? And so there's supposition, but a lot of research. Mm-hmm. And I enjoy the researching a lot, reading and doing the research, and then the writing process. The whole publishing part, not so much. But because it's just kind of not.
I don't know. Give us, we're basically out of time, but give me the 3-minute overview if you can of like what it takes to publish. Like you've done all this work. It's taken you years of research. What happens? You have this book. You hear about editors that slash it, dice it, edit it.
Yeah.
What happens?
The editing process is brutal. But they do. But also it's embarrassing because you made so many mistakes. And you got, like, I had to have battle maps made. I had to get images, and I need to get permission from the Library of Congress and Yale and other places to get images to put in the book. So there's a lot of logistics.
Even when it's public, you have to get permission?
Yeah.
Why?
Because they require a request and require attribution, and you don't want them mad at you.
Right.
And it costs you nothing to get it. Sometimes, by the way, I needed high-resolution images of people that you couldn't otherwise get. So Yale, for example, is really good about it. The Library of Congress is good. So... and then I had to have maps made.
Yep.
And so that kind of stuff, the maps are kind of fun, actually.
Yeah.
But then you go to a publisher and they beat up your book. You also have to have the cover designed. You got to figure out what the cover is going to look like.
Yep.
And then you got to go through the whole publishing process and promotion, and you give a lot of speeches, and you get, if you're lucky, you get to do TV and radio interviews. So that's it. It's fun, but and we're going to have a big party, right? Big book release party as we did for George.
Yep.
So I'm working on that right now too. So there's a lot of other logistics that I never thought of. Yep. I was just a guy that thought, hey, I have an idea. I'm going to write a book.
Right.
But it's been enough fun that I'm going to keep writing books and lawyering.
Well, and to that point, creating a business is like that too. I have an idea. I'm going to start a business. It's just like
I created a separate LLC, by the way. So here's, unlike most people's hobbies, mine is tax deductible.
Right.
So I created an LLC. I kept track of all my expenses. It has a separate checkbook, and all the expenses that I incur, which are a lot. And I spent a lot of money on books. I have a very tolerant wife. But unlike having a snowmobile, my purchases are tax deductible as part of this separate business entity that I have that are called Carpe Diem Publishing. That I run my entities through.
Great name.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on. It was a delight to talk with you. And where can people find you if they're interested in reaching out to you for either legal advice or any of your books?
Well, my book is easy. My last name is YOCH, and it's weownyacht.com. So that's where my books are. Same name. If you will put my name in and lawyer and yacht, YOCH, I'm the only one.
Okay.
I got a weird last name.
Yep.
So it's like sock, but it's not YOCH.
Well, I can say personally, obviously, I can't say enough about you, both as a friend and also as someone who mentors us in our own business. So thank you very much. Anyone listening, please reach out to Steve. He's amazing. And have a great day. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.